Muslim Brotherhood in the White House. I said they were a radical organization that wants to destroy Israel and establish a global caliphate. Well, let's put a final nail in that coffin. Let's just settle this dispute once and for all. And again, I'm not going to make the argument. I'm just going to use their own words. I'm going to show you something that happened at a political rally for the guy from the Muslim Brotherhood that is running for president of Egypt. He had a guy speak right before, or I think it was before him, a popular Egyptian imam. He's also a TV preacher, and he spoke to the supporters of the candidate for president from the Muslim Brotherhood, who was standing on stage and nodding in agreement. Remember, this is a largely secular group that means no harm to Israel, our biggest ally in the Middle East. You see if that still works for you and the president. Watch this.
حلم الخلافة الإسلامية، حلم أرض الخلافة يتحقق بإذن الله على يد الدكتور محمد مرسي ومن معه من إخوانه وجماعته وحزبه. رأينا الحلم الكبير الذي نحلم به جميعا، الولايات المتحدة العربية، الولايات المتحدة العربية ستعود يكون عاصمة الخلافة، ستكون عاصمة الولايات المتحدة العربية هي القدس إن شاء الله. تكون عاصمتنا ليست القاهرة ولا مكة ولا المدينة، وإنما القدس إن شاء الله. وسيكون هتافنا على القدس رايحين شهداء بالملايين، على القدس رايحين
شهداء بالملايين،
على القدس رايحين شهداء بالملايين، على القدس رايحين شهداء بالملايين، على القدس
رايحين شهداء بالملايين، على القدس.
نوري ولن نواري ولن نداهن. نعم، هدفنا القدس، سنصلي في القدس أو ننال الشهادة على أعتاب القدس.
الله
على القدس رايحين شهداء بالملايين.
Do you think that's important at all for anybody to even show that on national television? Did you notice the fist? A global caliphate is coming. And they want to headquarter it in Jerusalem. So let me get this straight. The left wants to silence anyone who warns Jews that old hatreds are rising again, except at the same time they're dumping Miracle-Gro and all the seeds of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic hatred in the region and in Europe and here. They dismiss anyone who says the seeds could and now have sprout Nazis or communists. Both groups kill Jews by the millions. Then when somebody says the Muslim Brotherhood is not secular, look at the name, they dismiss them. And they follow Alinsky's advice. Same advice, in fact, the advice that was given to Saul Alinsky by Al Capone's killers, his hitmen, and used by Joseph Stalin. You isolate and marginalize. And if that doesn't work, Joseph Stalin decided, yeah, then you kill. It worked for Capone and Lenin and Mao and Stalin and Che and Pol Pot and Mussolini and Hitler, but I think you get the point. At the same time, the administration is marginalizing and isolating. No one notices that this administration and this president is appointing members of the Muslim Brotherhood into his administration. Arif Ali Khan, former Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary for Policy Development, Muslim Brotherhood. Mohammed El-Bari, Homeland Security Advisory Committee member, Muslim Brotherhood. Rashad Hassan, he's a State Department Special Envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Muslim Brotherhood. Ibu Patel, Obama Administration Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, all part of a group that wants to establish a caliphate in Jerusalem called the Muslim Brotherhood. America, America, America. Ponder where we are. Which is more dangerous for the Jews and for all of humanity? Which one is going to lead to peace and prosperity? Going down a path that the world has gone down time and again and hoping for change, when that change is never identified, it never ends well. Here's what I recommend. You instead of hoping for change, you pray for the protection of divine providence, and then get off your knees and get ready. The Nazi and communist parties are gaining power elsewhere in the world, and it will come here. The Islamists are gaining power, and they are already here. And the global caliphate is coming.
على المسلمين أن يقاتلوا أهل الكتاب حتى يجبروهم على دفع الجزية؟ جميع أهل الكتاب في جميع أنحاء الأرض؟
القتال هو ابتداء لإزالة الحواجز المادية، وهذا قتال للدول وليس قتال للأفراد. فنحن عندما نعلن الجهاد على ألمانيا مثلا، على الدولة إذا رفضت أن تقبل أن يدخل الإسلام إلى أهل ألمانيا، فنحن نخيرهم بين الإسلام أو الجزية والخضوع لأحكام الإسلام. والجزية هي الضريبة الوحيدة التي يدفعها غير المسلمين، بينما المسلمون يدفعوا الزكاة ويدفعوا الخراج ويدفعوا الركاز ويدفعوا الضرائب إذا نقص في بيت المال ولم يكن هناك مال للجند أو للجيش أو لغيره.
هل الطرف الآخر أن يخشاكم يا شيخ أحمد؟ يعني هل تلوم الأوروبيين أن يخشوكم حين تقولون إن علينا أن نقاتلهم جميعا؟
نقاتل الدولة، نقاتل الجيوش، لا نقاتل الناس.
الناس نقاتل الدولة.
طبعا.
طيب
أنا عشان أخذ من فهد الخطاب.
طيب هل تلومون
الناس لا نقاتلهم، لا نقتلهم، فقط إذا أصرت هذه الدولة أن تمنع نشر الإسلام في أراضيها فنقاتل الدولة كدولة.
يعني كتاب كلاش اوف سيفلايزيشنز لسامويل هانتنغتون واللي قبله لفوكوياما أستاذه الذي تنبأ بأن الصراع القادم بين الإسلام والغرب.
يا دكتور
لحظة شوي، يعني معناته صحيح
صحيح، هم استعمرونا وهم كذا، والإسلام لولا الجهاد لما وصل إلينا، ولولا الجهاد لما وصل إلى باقي البقاع. أغلب العالم القديم خلال ربع قرن كان واصل الإسلام بالجهاد، والناس العاديين بدهم الإسلام، اللي ما بده الإسلام ظل على دينه. نحن في بلاد الشام أغلب أجدادنا الأوائل كانوا ليسوا مسلمين، لكن دخلوا لحسن الإسلام ولعدالة الإسلام، وبقي القلة القليلة في بلاد المسلمين.
رائع. لا
وحفظنا لهم.
نقطة جوهرية. رائع. إذا نحن مأمورون بالقتال لنشر دين الله.
نعم، هذه طريقة الإسلام في نشر الإسلام.
طيب لو وصلتم أنتم إلى الحكم هل ستحررون فلسطين؟
نعم، يجب إعلان الجهاد ويجب إزالة إسرائيل من الوجود وإفنائها. هذا الكيان مسخ ويجب إزالته من الوجود.
هل ستوافق على أن يتولى مسيحي وزارة المالية مثلا؟
لا أوافق. فيش وزارات أصلا في الإسلام، ما في وزارات.
ماذا هنالك؟
في وزير تفويض وفي وزارة التنفيذ. وزير التفويض يعتبر من الحكم، والحكم خاص بالمسلمين فقط. كل ما هو من شأن الحكم، يعني رئيس الدولة اللي هو الخليفة أو معاون التفويض أو معاون التنفيذ أو الوالي أو العامل اللي هو زي بيشبه المحافظ، هذا يجب أن يكون مسلما ويجب أن يكون رجلا أيضا. المستقبل هو للإسلام، وسوف والخلافة الإسلامية قادمة تحقيقا لبشرى رسولنا صلى الله عليه وسلم، ثم تكون خلافة على منهاج النبوة.
Now, Al-Qaeda has as one of its clearly stated goals the reestablishment of a caliphate. So let's get this right. We're going to go back over here to this map for just a brief second that we've now scribbled all over. We're going to continue to do so. I think that's what the purpose of chalkboards are for. So in other words, a caliphate is a movement, a global movement of all the nations of Islam or Muslims to form a nation of Islam. Almost like how we're the United States, they're going to be the United States of Islam, so to speak. So we see that Tunisia has had uprisings. We've seen uprisings in Libya. We now have the uprisings in Egypt. We now have problems going on in Israel and Syria and everywhere else. Iran, they're all joining together under one flag, the flag of Islam. And so what happens is this global movement. The caliphate, my friends, has begun.
O officers of Pakistan's armed forces, you must seize the traitor rulers and end their support of the Ummah's enemies.
He's the highest serving army officer to be arrested in a decade. The group he's allegedly linked to is Hizb ut-Tahrir. That group's banned in Pakistan. Its primary goal is to establish an Islamic caliphate across the Muslim world. It says it doesn't advocate violence, but it wants to overthrow Muslim governments.
Democracy? We have Pakistan and Bangladesh. Is anybody proud of the governments of Pakistan and Bangladesh? Anybody here?
The Muslims in Afghanistan desire to live under their Islam. They desire a system, a model of governance that represents their beliefs and their underlying values. The West can continue to reject and place its head in the sand, and by extension and by default continue digging its own grave.
And this ummah has overcome the Mongols and the crusaders of the past and now the crusaders of the present. This ummah is still standing after the collapse of communism, and this ummah will continue to stand after the collapse of capitalism.
There is one struggle. There is one struggle. There is one struggle. Here and there, it's one struggle. It's a struggle against the return of Islam. The return of Islam. The manifestation of Islam. In its entirety.
This is why it is so significant that we understand the attacks as a whole, appreciate the context in which they occur, a broader clash of ideologies,
Quickly produced video promoting a recent conference calls on people to be part of the revival, the fall of capitalism and rise of Islam.
You are the descendants of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, who refused to smile until Al-Aqsa was liberated. The prayers of Tahrir Square sent chills down the spines of Western leaders and their agents.
The call for an Islamic state. Hizb ut-Tahrir, an Islamic group with members here in Australia, attracted around 1,000 delegates over the weekend.
अज़ाइम को सीनों में बेदार कर दे, निगाहे मुसलमान को तलवार कर दे.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Verily the believers are but a single brotherhood.
The time of Khilafah is coming, and they know that. We know, and they know. They cannot stop it. No one can stop Qadar Allah. No one. Whatever they do. Islam is coming. Islam is coming.
The Islamic group Hizb ut-Tahrir held a conference titled One Nation, One State, and One Flag, calling all Yemenis to join in the grindstone of establishing an Islamic state, which they say will unite all Muslims under the authority of Islam.
Life's journey now the long promised question come. How did you worship?
Are members of Hizb ut-Tahrir, an Islamic group that was banned in Lebanon until 2006, a year after the Syrian army pulled out.
This life is a bridge, don't build upon it, but cross over it.
we are gathered here in Copenhagen. This is not only my message, this is the message of a nation of more than 1.5 billion Muslims.
So that this ummah starts with a new call. The call for the Khilafah, the call for Tawheed, the call for unity. And that is the only way forward for the Muslim world.
Do we want that democracy? Yeah! Do we want Islam and the Sharia? Do we want the Khilafah state? Yeah! Repeat!
To Bayt al-Maqdis, to the lands of Al-Isra wal-Ma'raj, we're going to march as martyrs in our millions.
Palestine is Islamic land and will forever remain Islamic land.
Soal perlunya khilafah atau pemimpin bagi umat Islam untuk mengatasi berbagai permasalahan seperti korupsi dan ketidakadilan.
Do not fear, no, and do not despair, in the mercy of Allah awaiting you there. Do not fear, for the will may compare to the will of Allah.
They thought they could keep us in shackles. They thought they could force us into submission. They thought that they could keep us divided.
Our belief is one, our sentiments are one, our vision is one, and our brotherhood is one. That's the struggle. Wherever a Muslim is,
Israel may be in peril like never before. A country surrounded by devastating threats on every side. End-time prophecy is rapidly unfolding before our very eyes. Chief Chris Mitchell is here to discuss how history's final chapters will be written in Israel, in Jerusalem.
I want to go back to all the changes that have been taking place. Syria, Egypt, Turkey, of course, what's going on in Iran right now.
Exactly, right.
How do you see all this tying into prophecy, the whole rearrangement of the Middle East?
Well, for years, decades actually, the Middle East had been sort of dominated by these autocratic regimes like Mubarak, Gaddafi in Libya, Mubarak was in Egypt, Assad in Syria, and they sort of, exactly, they sort of suppressed what was percolating underneath, which was this radical Islamist. And so radical Islam through the Arab Spring has sort of come to the surface. It came to the surface in Egypt, it has in Libya, it did in Tunisia, and now in Syria. And I think how it ties in prophetically perhaps, it's almost like the echoes of Zechariah are reverberating throughout the Middle East right now. You know, he said that one day the nations would gather around the country of Israel. And you can see that sort of unfolding as time goes on.
Hello and welcome to A Spirited Debate. I'm Lauren Green. Well, the Arab Spring uprisings in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. Does the Bible have anything to say about these events? 2,000 years ago, all roads led to Rome. Today, all roads seem to lead to Jerusalem. It is the most disputed and fought over piece of land in the history of mankind. And today, the Middle East region is a hotbed of political and religious conflicts that belie its relatively small geographical size. Which brings up the question, will history's final chapter be written in Jerusalem? Attempts to connect the dots between what's unfolding today in the news and the biblical narrative. Chris Mitchell is the Jerusalem Bureau Chief for Christian Broadcast News. He joins me now from Jerusalem. Hey, Chris.
It's great to be with you, Lauren.
It's great. You know, as I'm talking about the biblical prophecies, a lot's been written the last few days, the last couple of weeks about biblical prophecy, especially the verses in Isaiah that talks about Damascus. Explain how your book is really kind of different.
Well, it's different in this way, Lauren. It sort of connects many of the trends that are happening in the Middle East right now. To give you an example, one of the trends that are happening is that in Islam, many Islamic factions are looking to Jerusalem as the capital of a future caliphate. Also, Jews, for the last 100 years or so, they've been coming back to Israel and back to their capital, Jerusalem. And as well, many Christians recently have really have a passionate love for Jerusalem. And in unprecedented numbers, Christians are praying for the peace of Jerusalem like never before. So if you take Syrian rebels in Syria who want to make Jerusalem a caliphate, if you take Jews living in Judea and Samaria, Christians coming to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, these are sort of threads that are weaving a tapestry that makes history, point back to here, to the city of Jerusalem.
What does the tapestry look like? What are we seeing in terms of the biblical prophecy?
Well, I think it's sort of Jerusalem's becoming the convergence of the crossroads sort of history and prophecy, and we're increasingly, as you said in the introduction, 2,000 years ago, all roads led to Rome. Now they are seemingly leading to Jerusalem. And so if you look at the biblical trends, for example, Aliyah, which is a Jewish word that means coming back to Israel, about 150 years ago, this place, Jerusalem, was a backwater. Mark Twain in the 1800s and late 1800s called it lifeless and dreary. But now it's a vibrant city, and it's sort of, history sort of awoke a slumbering Jerusalem. And now it becomes many times the source of contention. As you said, it's one of the most controversial places in the world. And just a couple of years ago, I remember when Vice President Joe Biden was here, and during his visit, there was an announcement that were going to be apartments built in Jerusalem. It became an international crisis. That's just one example of what Jerusalem sort of is the focus of world attention. And increasingly, the focus seems to be on the city.
Well, specifically, though, what does the Bible say about Jerusalem in terms of its narrative? Narrative of redemption, which is what the Bible's all about. But what does it have to do with Jerusalem, and how do the events of today fall in line with that?
Well, Zechariah the prophet says in both chapter 12 and chapter 14 that it would become a burdensome stone, and we see that happening. And all nations would eventually come to this city. We were listening to Fox News just a few minutes ago, and about this rapprochement with Hassan Rouhani, the new president of Iran. But if you look at Iran, in many places they want to see Jerusalem as the capital of a future caliphate. Sometimes what people are hearing in the news, they know what's happening, but sometimes they don't know exactly what. And in Jerusalem, as the Bible says, one day that the word of the Lord will be coming out of Jerusalem. And it says in Zechariah again that one day that the streets of Jerusalem, there'll be children laughing and playing. And if you come to Jerusalem today, you'll see that being fulfilled. And many see, eventually that what's happening here is sort of the emergence of a new kingdom and a new king. The Bible eventually talks about the return of the Lord, Jesus Christ coming back here, and so that's what many people see, this convergence of coming back, setting the stage.
But there are conflicts going on there, and one of the things that a lot of people ask me about is Mecca. Why is it Jerusalem seems to be the focus of Muslims and not Mecca? Why isn't Mecca the capital of a caliphate instead of Jerusalem?
That's a good question. Just before, when Mohammed Morsi, the Egyptian president, was running for office, one of the speakers at one of his rallies said that the capital of the caliphate would not be Mecca, Medina, or Cairo, but it would be Jerusalem. I think part of that is that they want to supplant what the Jews are doing. It's many times here, this is a religious conflict, it's a spiritual conflict, and they want to supplant what Israel is doing, and they basically want to eradicate Israel. So I think the focus in many ways for whether it's Syrian rebels, whether it's Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood or those Al-Qaeda elements. They want to see Jerusalem as the capital of a future caliphate. And it both goes in both Sunni and Shiite Islam, this desire to make Jerusalem. It's a good question. I mean, Mecca is sort of their spiritual capital, but eventually I think they want to see Jerusalem as the capital of what's this caliphate or Islamic empire.
Well, let's connect the dots, though, because we've got a lot of talk about Syria today. But this is actually very much connected, you were saying, to what the Arab Spring that happened in Egypt, in Lebanon, and all the uprisings that we're seeing in the Middle East of these Islamic countries that, on the surface, want democracy. But you're saying there's a connection here.
Yeah, I think you mean a connection between democracy and what's happening in the Arab Spring?
And the idea that the Arab Spring and what they're fighting for, and all of these uprisings have to do with primarily some of the same things, right? They want the same things.
Yeah, well, when we were in Egypt a couple of years ago during the Egyptian Revolution in Tahrir Square, just before Mubarak was overthrown, there was a sentiment in many of the Egyptians that we talked to that they wanted democracy, they wanted freedom, they wanted more better economy, better education. But I think that was supplanted by the Muslim Brotherhood when they came in and they took over for at least a year. I think that's the dream of many people in the Middle East, but I think it's being supplanted. One example of that is in Turkey, and Erdogan, and I think it's a largely untold story in the West, is that Erdogan has been in power for over 10 years right now, and he made the statement that democracy is like a streetcar, and then when you get off it when you want to take that particular stop. I think so sometimes democracy is being used as a tool by some Islamists to implement democracy, but then take over, and I think that's what's happening in Turkey. There's also the statement that says, you know, one man, one vote, one time. So they could use democracy as a tool just to start to implement what they see as an Islamist caliphate.
What do the events in the Middle East, though, have to do with us here in the United States? How should we be looking at this? I mean, can this change our lives?
Yeah, it can change our lives dramatically. I mean, we just a couple of weeks ago, we almost went to war with Syria, and that would have affected us dramatically. Economically, for one, who knows what's going to happen to the price of oil? It'll affect the price of gas. Who knows what's going to happen to the Suez Canal if that becomes sort of a roadblock to the flow of oil to Europe and the West, and that could affect it. Also, it affects American servicemen and women if they're going to be put into action or in harm's way. And so what happens here sort of ripples around the world, and especially to the shores of the United States. And so we need to be concerned about what's happening. One other thing, Lauren, is that I think it's a biblical principle, is in Genesis 12:1 and 2 that says, or 2 and 3, that says, "He that blesses Israel will be blessed. He that curses Israel will be cursed." So I think it's a very important biblical principle for the United States to keep blessing the nation of Israel. Not to say that it's always perfect, but there's a spiritual blessing to those that bless this country.
But Chris, there are many people around the world, and certainly millions of people who don't believe in biblical prophecy, who don't see what's happening in the Middle East as any sort of understanding, and actually are fearing how Christians view the kind of prophecies in the Bible saying, those who, support Israel will be blessed and those who don't will not be blessed. This is a very political statement that you're saying, and that they fear this. And that the Bible really doesn't give prophecy. It simply is a narrative of redemption. And so to make these kind of statements about what the Bible actually means in terms of the political elements that are going on, that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Right. No, I understand that. And there is the fear that some people that believe in Bible prophecy will actually try to precipitate those events that the Bible talks about. And that can be a dangerous thing. But I think one of the things I'd like to do, what I wanted to do in Dateline Jerusalem, Lauren, was sort of lay out some of these trends that are happening that I think actually people should be rejoicing about eventually. One of those trends is that the gospel that started here 2,000 years ago is sort of circumnavigating the world, and it's eventually going to come back here to the Mount of Olives, the sort of eternal finish line. People are praying like never before for the peace of Jerusalem, and people are praying for these unfolding of events. I don't know how to allay the fears of certain people that look at biblical prophecy in a different way, but if the people want to understand the times, I think that they have to have a biblical lens and a biblical foundation of what's happening. And there's a scripture in the First Chronicles that says, the sons of Issachar understood the time.